Thanks for clicking into another edition of Sit Down with Ed Brown. Our guest today has traveled the world looking for creatures like Bigfoot, Loch Ness Monster, Chupacabra, Mothman, and more. Now, he's one of the stars on the show featured on the History Channel entitled Missing in Alaska. Please welcome Mr. Ken Gerhard. Hey, Ken, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing terrific, Ed. Oh man, I got to say, it's a real honor to be on your show. Thanks for having me.
Oh man, we're the lucky ones. You know, we get to talk to a lot of great people, and it just seems like everybody we talk to is just a pleasure, and you guys are so knowledgeable. You know, and we're learning from that, and we appreciate you taking the time to be on the show.
Oh, definitely, man. I'm looking forward to talking to you.
Good deal. Well, I got to ask, we got to start this thing off kind of. I got an interesting question for you because I was looking through your resume, and it's a pretty impressive cryptid resume, by the way. And I saw something that kind of surprised me a little bit. Shipping wars?
Ah, yeah, shipping wars. Yes, possibly a mistake. I don't know. But no, seriously, it's a fine show, I'm sure. What happened there was, you've heard of the Minnesota Iceman, of course. I'm sure many of your listeners have, of course, as well. Well, a couple of years ago, the Minnesota Iceman exhibit popped up on eBay. It's been kind of in hiatus for years. And a friend of mine who owns a museum of curios in Austin, Texas, actually purchased it because he's a huge Minnesota Iceman fan. So he had it shipped down from Minnesota to Texas, and he essentially, as part of that show, they showed, the transportation. That was the challenge for the driver to transport this Iceman to Texas, presumably before it melted, I guess. But on the way, we actually met the exhibit, and we met in Fouke, Arkansas, of course, famous for the legend of Boggy Creek, the Fouke Monster, along with my good friend and doppelganger, Lyle Blackburn. We, the two of us, met up with the crew, and we basically took them into the woods investigating the Fouke Monster. And, of course, we got to check out the Minnesota Iceman exhibit, too, which was cool. So that was kind of the theme of the show, and it was actually fun. I just wish that they had given the Minnesota Iceman and Bigfoot maybe a little bit more homage, you know what I mean? It was kind of a fun show, and I guess they were kind of making light of it a little bit. So, but it was a fun experience.
Good deal. Good deal. Now, I've seen pictures, and I'm sure most of us have. If you've actually seen this thing, then what was your opinion? What do you think?
On the Minnesota Iceman?
Yeah.
Oh, you know what? I'm gonna have to do a spoiler alert here. I've got a book coming out next year called The Menagerie of Mysterious Beasts, and I have an entire chapter dedicated to the saga of the Minnesota Iceman. And for me personally, there's a connection that goes way back because I grew up until I was 11 years old. I grew up in Minnesota, and during the Minnesota State Fair in 1976, I actually visited the Minnesota Iceman exhibit as a young boy, and it had a profound impact on me. It was one of the things that really got me into Bigfoot. So to kind of reconnect with the Minnesota Iceman all those years later was pretty cool. But the thing that I like to point out, or the main point I want to make, is that Bernard Heuvelmans and Ivan Sanderson, two of the founding fathers of cryptozoology, and two esteemed scientists, zoologists with impressive credentials, examined the Minnesota Iceman for 3 days. And granted, it was frozen in ice and covered with glass, so they couldn't touch it, couldn't take samples from it, but they photographed it, they lit it up, they could smell it apparently, its decaying flesh, so they were convinced that it was authentic, that it was a real hominid, some type of subhuman, hairy, man-like creature. I don't know, but but then there was the other part of the story is that after that announcement came out in 1969 that they had seen this thing and they started publishing works about it, the owner, Frank Hansen, became very nervous because the police started visiting his house and there was allegations of an FBI investigation because this thing looked human and it was dead. And apparently had gunshot wounds too. So, wow. So he disappeared for a few months and then reappeared with a quote unquote latex Minnesota Iceman that he had made in Hollywood, and he said he was putting the original into storage. So there's this great mystery as to whether there was ever actually, if there were in fact two different versions of the Minnesota Iceman, a flesh and blood version that's gone and a latex version that was touring. or if it was just one all along, and whether Hubelmans and Sanderson were duped by this latex dummy and thought it was real. So hopefully that's enough information for your listeners to make a judgment. And actually, the exhibit right now is at Loren Coleman's Cryptozoology Museum in Portland, Maine. So people can go visit it if they're up in Northeast right now and see it for themselves. And it typically resides here in Austin, Texas, at Museum of the Weird. So people can actually go and visit the exhibit and make their own judgment.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I definitely urge people to do that. I met Loren Coleman at Bigfoot last year, and I know he's got an event coming up in January or February in Florida, mm-hmm. the International Cryptozoological Conference. Are you going to be there?
No, unfortunately I'm not. I was hoping I would, but he's got a pretty full schedule of amazing speakers, and some of them from around the world. And I was filming when he started putting it together, so I couldn't make any hard commitments anyways. So. Sure. But Lyle Blackburn, who I mentioned earlier, he's from Texas, mm-hmm. wrote the Beast of Boggy Creek. He's going to be there. And Rob Robinson from Florida, the Skunk Ape investigator. So there's going to be some pretty cool speakers at that event, but I don't think I'll be making it.
Okay. Well, it sounds like a must attend anyway. So if everybody gets a chance, definitely go down and check that out. Do you know if he's going to have the Iceman with him? Do you know, one way or the other?
I doubt he would. It is quite a project to transport this thing. It's in a giant coffin, sarcophagus covered in glass, and I doubt he would bring that with him.
Gotcha. All right. Well, moving on. I mean, that's an interesting lesson, I guess, on the whole Iceman thing. I was unaware of all that, which is pretty cool. So it's nice to hear stories that you've never heard before. I love that. So I got to ask, how does a little guy from Michigan and Minnesota who grows up in Texas, how do you get involved as deep as you are in the cryptic world? I mean, what was it that really drew you in?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, lifelong passion, young boy, I learned about Bigfoot, and so, it's something I've been interested in my whole life, but I didn't really plan on making it a career path, but about 15 years ago, when the internet began to kind of develop a little bit better, I hooked up with some Bigfoot researchers here in Texas, and they were outstanding and passionate researchers, investigators who had experiences and were expert trackers, and I began going out and doing field work with them, and I began to see and experience things that I couldn't explain, and I became more and more obsessed with the possibility that Bigfoot exists and some of these other cryptid creatures. And then I met some of my heroes like Loren Coleman and others, and he encouraged me to write a book, which I did, about thunderbirds, giant monstrous bird sightings. And then in 2006, I was fortunate to meet a producer from the Travel Channel who was doing a Bigfoot documentary, and he gave me my first opportunity to do a television show, and I've just been very blessed since then. Things have just really taken off in a lot of ways, and I'm just having a blast.
Yeah, that's all that matters, man. Just having fun, and I think that's what a lot of people miss about this is it's not really. I mean, it is about finding evidence that Bigfoot exists, but it's more about having fun getting it. And a lot of people take it pretty serious. But you got to keep your head down, have fun, enjoy it, and just keep going forward. So that's pretty cool. Have you ever seen any cryptid animal that you feel is cryptid?
No, I never have. People always ask me that. I may have seen eyeshine, but I like to err on the side of being conservative about those kinds of statements. So I don't know what I saw. Could have been anything with reflective eyes. But I did hear some pretty remarkable vocalizations that were probably within 40 yards of where I was standing one time. I was with Chester Moore Jr. from Texas, another Bigfoot researcher, and we were in a very remote area, North Texas, where there had been a lot of sightings. And right after dark, we started hearing these noises coming from the thick brush, and it was kind of a thunderous, kind of a grunting. It also kind of sounded like a diabolical kind of deep laughter or a panting sound, all kind of mixed into one. But it was huge, whatever was making, and it sounded definitely like a primate. I mean, there was no doubt about it. That's what we thought we were hurting, was some type of large primate. we didn't actually see it that night because it was in thick brush. We kind of thought about going into the brush, but we weren't really, we only had one firearm, and this thing sounded like it was angry, and we didn't know, so the next morning, though, later that night, we did see the eye shine in kind of the same approximate area where we'd heard this thing. We were off in the distance looking down at it at that point. But the next morning, when we finally did make our way through the brush, we found where we'd heard these sounds coming from. We found a small beach, and on the beach there were a number of very deep footprints. And there was also a pile of kind of turtle shells that had been mutilated. And these turtle shells had literally been ripped in half from top to bottom, right down the middle, and thrown into a pile, and there was no flesh or remains. So, I've never heard of any animal that's capable of ripping a turtle shell in half. So something very powerful. So all of that together was the most convincing thing that I've ever experienced, but I've still never seen one with my own eyes.
Wow, that'd be a scary feeling, something strong enough to rip a turtle in half and just, eat the inside. That's wow. That's interesting. Now, when you were looking down the hill and you mentioned that you saw it like you were looking down at this eye shine, what kind of position was it? Was it high, or was it look like something tall? Did it look like something maybe crouching down? What was your opinion of that?
Well, that was the thing. Is they looked pretty high off the ground. And we'd moved after we heard the vocalizations and couldn't get through the brush. We moved to a bridge, kind of a levee over the lake, so to speak. So it was unelevated. So we're looking down back at the spot and that's where we saw the eye shine. It was reflecting in some of our spotlights and things. And in Chester's estimation, and I'm admittedly not as good about judging things like distance and height and so forth, but
be a golfer.
Well, he's an expert hunter, angler, and does all kinds of things. But he thought that it was at least 6 feet off the ground, if not higher. Now, to me, it looked at least 5 feet off the ground, or the eyes did. So we have a lot of white-tailed deer here in Texas. They're probably the tallest animals I can think of off the top of my head that would be in that area. And, the whitetails in Texas, or at least in that area, you're probably not going to get eye shine much higher than 4 feet off the ground, I wouldn't think. So,
sure.
But, I can't say conclusively, but I guess the fact that the eye shine was also coming from the direction where we'd heard these sounds, that was kind of a strong tie-in. So, but yeah, it's true. There is, if that's what we saw, it was kind of a yellowish green glow. It wasn't red. I know some people report that, but, possibly that's what we were looking at.
Sure. And I've always kind of contributed the eye shine to ambient light. If the moon has a reddish tint to it, you're going to have more of a reddish reflection from the eyes. That's what I've always thought anyway. I don't know, but that's pretty cool.
Makes sense. Yeah, it makes sense.
Now, when I first saw you, I saw you on Monster Quest, and you were looking for the Chupacabra.
Mm-hmm.
I'm assuming you remember that episode where you guys found this tunnel, and you guys were sticking the camera down in the tunnel.
Oh yeah, That wasn't Monster Quest, but I've done about four or five shows that are similar to that. We did a Monster Quest Chupacabra. We didn't put anything down a hole, but we did some other things, set traps and stuff. But I've also done the show you're describing, The Unexplained Files. I also did an episode called Paranatural, and one or two more. So yeah, we've done the Chupacabra thing a lot, but.
Good.
The clarification there is, and the main thing people ask me is, what's the difference? Why do these Chupacabras in Texas look like mangy dogs, whereas the ones that people have described in Puerto Rico are kind of reptilian, gargoyle-like creatures? And I think it's a situation where you've got people using one generic term to describe a lot of different things, kind of a composite identity of different types of things, creatures.
Sure.
I can't speak to Puerto Rico, but here in Texas, the animals that have been called Chupacabras are definitely canids. We've done DNA tests on a lot of the remains. I've examined half a dozen of these animals myself. But they look really hideous because they're missing their hair. Their skin is kind of a tough, bluish-gray, leathery feel. They have very long teeth, claws, and in some cases they have kind of humpbacks and disproportionate limbs. So they're really weird looking. So the prevalent theory, of course, is that they have a disease called sarcoptic mange, which causes them hair to fall out and look really weird and stuff. But there also could be some genetic things going on with mutations, inbreeding, hybridization, and so forth.
Sure.
There's so many of them, but they're not monsters. They're just really weird animals. But the name Chupacabra comes into play because there have been some allegations here in Texas that these animals are drinking the blood of small farm animals, and that has not been scientifically verified. It's just speculation and assumptions. So that's where the name Chupacabra comes in, because that method of predation, where an animal comes in and drinks blood, which is really not known in any higher animals other than vampire bats, right? But
right.
But that's the name Chupacabra is just kind of stuck here in Texas. But lately, some of the more serious cryptozoologists have been referring to these animals as the Texas blue dogs, to make that clarification that they are canids, dogs. They have a weird bluish color, and they're mostly found here in Texas.
So do you think there's, and I understand you mentioned a minute ago about it being, one subclassification or basically the description is like, they're just depending on where they're from, they would make a different description. I mean, but do you think there's a difference between the American Chupacabra and the Puerto Rican Chupacabra?
Well, yes and no. And again, it becomes a lot of gray areas, because a lot of the original attacks that were attributed to the Chupacabra back in the 1995, when small animals were being killed, some of those attacks were probably perpetuated by wild dogs. Puerto Rico has a huge problem with feral dog populations running everywhere and killing livestock. So,
sure.
But the eyewitness descriptions, and my colleague Nick Redfern, a good friend of mine, has been in Puerto Rico quite a bit investigating those cases. People describe the Puerto Rican Chupacabra as some type of unearthly creature. A lot of people say it has bat-like wings. It's got a reptilian look. So it sounds like something, more of kind of the what we call zooform phenomenon, like the reports of the dog man and Mothman and those kinds of things that are just a little bit on the fringe.
Sure. I wasn't going to go to the Mothman yet, but since you brought that up, I know you went to the Mothman festival I guess a couple months ago. Tell us about that. Was it it had to be a great time. I know I saw a lot of pictures. Sharon, Lyle, all these great people are there. I mean, tell us a bit about the festival. Was it a good time?
Oh yeah, we had a blast. It's the first year that I was able to make it, and I've been invited up there many times, but this year I was finally able to work it out. Of course, going with Lyle was a blast. We made a fun road trip out of it. But I've been to Point Pleasant before, and of course I've written a book about Mothman and similar creatures. So we did a little bit of investigation in the TNT area, although it was pretty busy up there. There were a lot of people kind of pumping around. Everyone had the same idea, but that was fun. And man, it's one of the best crypto-related events in the U.S. by far. I mean, you have thousands of people that show up. The community, the town of Point Pleasant, really embraces the Mothman. They have a statue in the town square and a museum, and everyone there knows the history. And it's an amazing saga. And it's interesting that you brought it up also, Ed, because this past Sunday, the 15th, was the 49th anniversary of the very first kind of most famous Mothman encounter. And so we're coming up on 50 years. Next year will be the 50th anniversary, and I'm sure the Mothman Festival will really be huge.
I can imagine.
Next year. Mm-hmm.
I'm pardon me for not having the knowledge of the Mothman history like you do, but that's what you're referring to. Is that the people where it showed up in front of their car, and they were the teenagers, I believe, and they were down at the TNT plant or something like that, and that's a great story. I mean, it's really cool. I mean, it's been terrifying.
No, you nailed it. There's two couples, the Scarberries and the Mallets, and they were cruising around the TNT area doing nothing in particular. When they saw this Mothman creature, it chased their car all the way back to town at 100 miles an hour, and they actually ended up in the police station filing a report and just complete hysteria that night, and that made national news the next day, as understandably. But that kind of kicked it off, because that, according to John Keel, over 100 sightings in that next year before, and of course the tragedy involved is the collapse of the Silver Bridge, which happened, on December 16th, 1967, and that very sad event, but that all kind of happened around the same time period.
Right. And that was the bridge going from Point Pleasant over into Ohio, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep. Correct.
Yeah, that was obviously a tragedy. Anytime we have loss of lives in anything, it's a horrible situation. Now, when you've been there and you've done any investigations, have you found anything to corroborate or to lead you, even witness testimony, that would lead you to believe that they're accurate?
The most evidence that I've collected is all eyewitness testimony. I've spoken to, because I've done a few TV shows about Mothman and flying humanoids, I've had the opportunity to interview dozens of people that have claimed to have encountered these things, and they, for the most part, have come off as very credible, sincere people that have had remarkable experiences. But actually investigating Point Pleasant, the area itself, I personally haven't found any evidence there in that particular, doing any research out there. Talking to the locals, Mothman is almost like, as I said, it's on the fringe, and there are many aspects of that case that are very much, metaphysical in nature. So, kind of like ghost hunting, it's one of those things where a lot of people that have been involved have had very subjective experiences. They felt this, they experienced this, but it's not like a Bigfoot sighting where there was something that hopefully left behind some tracks and broke a tree branch and screamed at you, those kinds of...
Something tangible.
Something tangible. It's always kind of an ambiguous, kind of spectral phenomenon. So, but, the fact that it involves a man-like creature with bat-like wings and giant glowing red eyes that chases cars, that's pretty creepy and cool, right?
Yeah, that's insane. I would have been very comfortable had I seen some man-sized bat flying after me. I'd have been pretty nervous myself. So it's all right. Now you've been all the way over. You've even investigated the Loch Ness Monster, right?
Mm-hmm. Correct. Yeah.
Tell me about that. How beautiful is that? That's it's on my bucket list. I'd love to go over there and check that out. It's got to be a beautiful area.
Oh, yeah, it is. That investigation was years ago, and it was one of the first things I ever did. I'm dying to get back, but I can tell you that, Loch Ness and Scotland in general, it's gorgeous, absolutely beautiful. Rolling hills, green hills, pastoral, old castles and ruins. There's this kind of mist that hangs over the ground. It's almost like a fairy tale. It's kind of a very medieval feel. Loch Ness is one of the iconic legends, of course, or mysteries around the world. But, it's one of the reasons that it's been such an evasive mystery is you're talking about a lake it's not enormous. It's about 24 miles long, about a mile wide at the widest spot, but it's incredibly deep, at least 800 feet deep, maybe deeper in some trenches. And the water visibility is incredibly bad because it's covered with peat, or full of peat that rolls down from the hills. It's very murky. And because of those conditions, it's just been very difficult for anyone to mount a real expedition. But there have been some major expeditions that have gone on for years there. There have been over 1,000 sightings. And there's still no definitive proof after all these years. And quite honestly, some of my cryptozoology colleagues are kind of skeptical about whether there is anything to that mystery after all. But I think there's got to be something to it. Some type of large animal in the lake. There's something out of place or unexpected. I think the image that the public has of this prehistoric marine reptile, the plesiosaur, I think that's probably the least probable of all the things that might be in Loch Ness. For kind of biological reasons, but there could definitely be a huge animal that's either in there part of the time, or maybe all year round. It's just not seen very often because it lives in those murky depths.
So isn't there a channel or something like that feeds into the loch on occasions, but not like 100% of the time?
Well, there's the River Ness connects the Loch Ness to the sea, but there's a series of, you're correct, channels, and the word is escaping me because I'm not a nautical person, but you know when they have to lower the ships up and down to different elevations, and locks, I guess, and you know, the water's very shallow through there, so, you know, it is possible that something could have moved through there, but it's hard to envision something enormous unless maybe it was amphibious. And, you know, it's worth pointing out there have been a handful or maybe even more of reports of the Loch Ness Monster on land there on the shore. So maybe it is something amphibious.
I guess my thought was more food getting in as opposed to food getting out. You know, if it lowers down, that could bring in a plethora of fish from the sea, you know, that could get trapped in the loch, or in the Loch Ness.
Well, there's a decent salmon supply in there. There's some pretty strong salmon runs that come into the loch on certain occasions. So conceivably, there is enough food to feed some large animals. Maybe not a huge herd or group of them, though, and that's where the scientists have always had a strong skeptical argument, is there's probably not enough food in Loch Ness to feed several animals that weigh, you know, several tons each.
Sure. That's a good point. And I would assume that if this were a prehistoric leftover, then it would just about have to be pretty big. And then you'd have to wonder how long is their lifespan. You know, maybe it's deceased now, sitting at the bottom of the loch. You know, who knows? But it's definitely a great mystery, and that's what makes it fun. You know, is the mystery part.
For sure.
Yeah. So you're on this new show. Well, it's not a new show. I guess it's been up a little bit, but Missing in Alaska. How did you get involved in that? I mean, I've watched a couple episodes and I love them. They're really pretty cool.
Thanks. Appreciate you watching, man. You know, actually, it was an idea that was already kind of the History Channel was already developing, and so you know, I went through an interview process, as did probably some other researchers, and I just got real lucky. They liked something about me, some type of dynamic that I brought in. But yeah, it's a fun show. It's well, you've seen it. It's pertains mainly to missing persons cases, of which there are an unbelievable amount in Alaska. That's kind of the first mystery there. Why are so many people vanishing up there? Sure. But there's also many native legends, and you're talking about one of the last great frontiers. 570,000 square miles of wilderness area with only one person per square mile. So yeah, we looked into obviously the Alaskan version of Bigfoot, which is known as the hairy man. We looked into some other cryptid creatures, water monsters, thunderbirds, giant wolves and bears, some kind of strange things too. And obviously there are reports of UFOs and also some weird kind of paranormal things going on there. So sure. We wanted to kind of think outside the box and look at some of those types of mysteries and to see if there might be connections with some of these missing persons cases.
Sure. My favorite episode that I've seen, you guys are in the woods and there's like these, I don't know how else to describe them other than, something made of sense, and you guys are talking about how maybe it was a trap, it was running people into this and then taking them, it was.
Oh, yeah, the Katani.
Yeah, that's it.
The Katani, the tailed ones, it's an alphabet of these. Well, nobody knows what they were except that they were human-like creatures with tails, and so we basically approached it, well, could they be describing some type of anthropoid, like a large monkey,
Sure.
These things are seen living in trees and caves. They have long tails, and they're highly intelligent. So, yeah, it's a pretty weird legend, and that's part of the legend is that these Katani creatures will actually devise traps and attempt to trap humans.
So when you finished filming that episode, what did you walk away with on that? I mean, what did you think about the possibility?
Well, sometimes when you're on set and you're in the moment of the investigation, things get a little bit exciting, and sometimes we get kind of carried away and our emotions get the best of us.
Sure.
But being a little bit detached from the situation now, I would say, there behind every legend there is potentially a grain of truth. So the Katani, whatever they are, could exist. And moreover, we kind of studied. I'd never really considered the possibility that something like a large predatory or vicious monkey could exist in Alaska. But when you look at some other monkey species around the world, for example, the old world macaques, the Japanese macaques, which are also known as snow monkeys, Macaca fuscata is the binomial name. They live in temperatures of like 20 degrees above zero. So I mean, they will actually live in pretty cold elements. They're very intelligent, highly adaptable monkeys. And then you also have some baboons in Africa that are, seen in high elevations on Mount Kilimanjaro. Some large Tibetan macaques that are seen in the Himalayas. So just to say that thousands of years ago, when the North America and Asia were connected with a land bridge, that some of these giant old world monkeys didn't migrate across into Alaska.
Sure.
And
sure.
That's a pretty exciting prospect. It is possible.
Absolutely. I guess that's one of the possibilities, and I won't say that it's my theory, but that's one of the possibilities with Bigfoot is a Gigantopithecus made that same trek,
Mm-hmm.
And that these are descendants. Bigfoot would be a descendant from the Gigantopithecus. What do you? I guess on that, what do you think the Bigfoot is?
Well, that's the $1 million question, isn't it, Ed? I could say on Monday and Wednesday and Friday I would vote for Gigantopithecus, and then maybe on Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. This is interesting. I just wrote a chapter. There's a Bigfoot compilation coming out called Wood Knocks, and myself, Lyle Blackburn, Nick Redfern, a lot of David Wetterly, a lot of people wrote different chapters. And my particular chapter, I decided to look at just kind of throw it out there. Well, what about a descendant of Homo erectus, which, of course, Homo erectus was more of a man-like form compared to Gigantopithecus. At least that's what we think, that, they may have used tools at some point and so forth. But the thing about Homo erectus was that they were one of the most successful hominid forms ever. I mean, their fossils have been found all over Asia, Africa, Europe. They lived for 2 million years. They were a very successful model. And there were some forms of Homo erectus that were apparently very large. There have been remains found in Java, referred to as Meganthropus, which a little smaller than Gigantopithecus, but still very large and robust. And then you have, the Hobbit, the Flores man, Homo floresiensis. Those remains were discovered in 2004. Well, these Homo erectus offshoots were alive and living next to humans possibly as recently as 12 to 13,000 years ago. So, all of those factors were just kind of popped into my head. And, I guess it goes more to the argument for a lot of people that try to classify Bigfoot as more of an highly intelligent human-like form, a hominin, as opposed to more of a kind of a lumbering ape or hominoid, So nobody knows. I mean, they seem to be pretty, the main thing that keeps jumping out at me is they've got to be really, really intelligent to avoid us, to have avoided us this long. And, I know a lot of my Bigfoot researcher friends, it's like they're tracking something with a thought process that's almost strategic at times. So,
sure.
Apes are not that, they can be, but apes are very loud, boisterous animals that have a huge impact on their environment. Most apes that you think of, the great apes, the gorillas, orangutans, and chimps. So if you're going to pump Bigfoot into that category, why wasn't it discovered? Why didn't scientists have remains 100 years ago when the mountain gorilla was finally found?
Right.
So I don't know. It's a great discussion, and it's just one of those things we'll never really know the answer until someone does manage to find one.
Sure. And I'm with you. I'm with you. I have no idea. I know that, I can look at the PG film, and I can tell you that animal is not lumbering. It's walking very smoothly. It's walking very matter-of-factly. It seems to, it has an agenda, which is to get away without, scurrying away. It's just briskly walking away. And so that does not seem like you said, a gorilla per se seems more human, to me. So
well, Ed, I'm sorry, just one last point I want to make on that, because I don't want it to seem like I'm shooting down your, obviously the Gigantopithecus theory could fit into that as well, because, even though the conservative scientists try to portray Gigantopithecus as like basically a giant gorilla or a giant orangutan, when the teeth and the jawbones were initially examined by the guy, I think his name was Franz Weidrich in Germany, the anatomist, he thought that it should be called Gigantopithecus. I can't even say it, man. Well, Gigantothropus. There we go. That's a tongue twister. Which basically would put it more along the lines of human as opposed to ape lineage. Its teeth are very, very human-like, So, and we don't know if it walked upright or on four legs because we haven't found any remains below the neck. So it could have very well been a giant human form and not a giant ape. We don't know.
Right. And it's funny because, I tell people all the time because, people that are a lot smarter than I am can look at a tooth and tell what kind of jaw it goes to. Look at that jaw and tell what kind of neck it goes to. Look at that neck and tell what kind of shoulder it goes to.
Mm-hmm.
So it's so much they can know from just a tooth that I look at it and go, tooth fairy dropped one. I don't know. But it's really cool. I mean, it's a great mystery, and that's why I'm into the whole Bigfoot thing in the first place. I just love the allure. I love the mystery. I love the conversations. It's just it's awesome.
Yep.
So what out of all the things that you've researched, and there's so many, and like I said earlier, I was reading your basically your resume here, and it's really insane. All the things, the Thunderbirds, werewolves, the Real Wolf Man. You were on a show. The list goes on and on and on. What's been your favorite, most fun experience?
Oh wow, that's such a hard question.
I should have warned you about this ahead of time, shouldn't I?
Such a hard question. I've been very lucky and very blessed to have had a number of amazing experiences, but probably my favorite was doing the Real Wolf Man. Traveling to France and having the opportunity to investigate such an iconic legend. In France, the beast of Gevaudan, La Bête du Gevaudan, is basically like their version of Bigfoot. Everyone in the country knows the legend, has heard the stories. You go to that region of France where this thing had attacked possibly 100 people back in the 1760s. And there are statues and museums and so forth, and books of archives and cemeteries filled with its victims, and it's a really amazing legend. I mean, if there ever really was a real werewolf, then it was this beast of Gevaudan creature. And even though it was a 250-year-old mystery, just to have the opportunity to go to the areas where this thing had attacked people, to see the cemeteries, to see some of the archives and all of that, it was a pretty unbelievable experience. But again, I've had very many that I'm lucky to have had.
Sure. And I'm going to correct myself because I remember that show now, and I actually forgot you were on it because you were with a retired detective, I believe. The two of you went.
Mm-hmm. Correct.
Yeah.
A homicide detective. Mm-hmm.
I remember that episode, and it was awesome. But wasn't that decided that it was someone in a wolf fur or something that was? Did they kill somebody or something like that doing that?
Well, there was a composite, again, using that composite identity phrase and sort of that there again. But there were 100 people attacked supposedly. There may have been some of the attacks may have been perpetrated by large wolves, because back in those days wolves would attack people on a more of a regular basis. And there may have also been a serial killer who was dressing up in wolf skins and attacking people. So there were accounts where they killed a guy that had some wolf skins on, but the killings didn't stop after they got that guy. So, or after they shot several large wolves. So the killing stopped in 1766 when a guy named Jean Chastel shot this animal and with a silver bullet, apparently. And it's remains were paraded around southern France and then eventually taken to King Louis XV, who said that thing is rotting and it smells, so just go get rid of it. But that's essentially when the killing stopped. So, I mean, the feeling is that whatever that animal that Chastel was the actual murderous beast. Sure. Now, the mystery is, the remains vanished, so, what was that animal that,
right.
that Chastel shot? So
then side note becomes, is that where the silver bullet legend comes from?
That's it. That's where Hollywood gets it. Chastel apparently he was a religious man, and he went and had some silver bullets made, and or he may have made them himself, I guess, but and he had them blessed by a priest. And the story is that he was sitting in the woods praying when the beast of Gevaudan walked right out in front of him, and it was almost as if God had kind of set the whole thing up, and he shot it with a silver bullet, and that's where Hollywood and a lot of the werewolf movies get the premise of the silver bullet.
That's awesome. That's awesome. All right, I'm going to touch on one more of your shows real quick because I love reading this. But you were with William Shatner at some point, right?
Yeah. William Shatner has a show, Weird or What is what it's called. It airs sometimes on Sci-Fi and other networks, but he's the host. I didn't actually get to meet William Shatner, unfortunately. He films his segments in California, and then they flew me up to Point Pleasant, West Virginia, to investigate the Mothman. Mm-hmm. And but it was fun being on a show with him, even if I didn't get to meet him. He's quite a funny guy, and he actually made fun of me several times, which was kind of an honor,
Was it the hat? Did he make fun of the hat?
Yeah, no, I don't think he made fun of the hat. He made fun of the fact that I was hunting the Mothman without any guns. And, of course, I had flown up there from Texas, so I didn't have a chance to bring any guns anyway.
Right,
but,
right.
There's kind of a funny byline to that story. William Shatner, of course, I've never met him, don't know him personally, but I've heard, and, he's highly competitive with his good friend Leonard Nimoy, and, the late Leonard Nimoy. And Leonard Nimoy, of course, hosted the iconic series In Search Of back in the 70s, which influenced me and a lot of other people in a big way. So it's almost like William Shatner decided to do a similar show kind of later on to just kind of show, Leonard Leo that he could do it too. So I think that's what's going on there.
Good deal. Well, if he ever makes fun of your hat again, just call him Captain Kirk, and I think he'll get the point. I love the hat, by the way.
Oh, well, thank you. It's I guess I get a lot of compliments, and sometimes I get hate mail too. After missing Alaska, several angry viewers got in touch with me to tell me to get rid of that stupid-looking hat. So, I mean,
you're kidding me.
It definitely pushes some people's buttons, see, good and bad, I guess.
Well, that's your trademark, man. Don't lose the hat. Don't lose the hat. That's your trademark. So, all right. So we've gone through all the shows and everything, and I mean, probably not all of them. I'm sure there's a ton more. It's amazing to see what you've done. And I keep calling it a resume, and that's what it is, What have you got coming up? I mean, do you have any events planned, schedules, anything going on?
I don't have any events planned at the moment. Things usually quiet down for me around this time of year as that stuff goes, and I don't plan too far ahead. But I'm currently working on a new book. It's my fourth book. It's called A Menagerie of Mysterious Beasts, and it's going to be published next year by Llewellyn, and it's pretty cool. I've been writing it for about 2 or 3 years now, and it's kind of an amalgamation of different topics that I've investigated. It's got a chapter on the Minnesota Iceman, which we talked about earlier. It's got a chapter on some of my Bigfoot research, sea monsters, werewolves, black panthers, thunderbirds, living pterodactyls, dragons. Did I miss anything? Giant amphibians, giant insects. So the field of cryptozoology is actually a lot, it's a lot more vast than people realize. It's more than just Bigfoot, Loch Ness Monster, Chupacabra. There are literally all kinds of crazy encounters that people claim to have had with, for lack of a better word, unverified species. So just kind of finishing that up at the moment, and taking some time off for the holidays finally. It was a pretty busy year up in Alaska. I was up there for 3 months this year, and I also fractured my ankle, which some people that watch the show may have known that, so I've been kind of rehabbing that as well.
I did read your post about that you were now able to announce it, that you did break your ankle. That's, ouch. So, one more cryptid animal real quick, since you were kind of talking about all the ones in your book. Have you done any research on the Dogman?
You know what? Years ago, I traveled up to Elkhorn, Wisconsin, and investigated the Beast of Bray Road. This was before I knew Linda Godfrey, and I was just kind of getting into the field. And I have actually gotten some accounts, some sightings of Dogman-type creatures, but it's nothing that I've really put a lot of time and effort into, honestly. And that's not a form of prejudice or bias. It's just there aren't as many sightings down here. I know it's a pretty hot thing up there in like Ohio, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, right. Kentucky. You know, those states have a lot of sightings, and I know guys that are actively investigating those cases up there right now. But no, I haven't personally. Mm-mm.
Good. Well, for some reason, I hear that coming up more and more often, and I guess I'm a little intrigued. I find it hard to believe that there's a Dogman. Mostly there's not. You know, I just don't know. But it's if it puts your mind at ease a little bit, Ed, and this is one of the things, I put Dogman in a kind of that fringe category with Mothman and some of these other creatures that really have no foundation in the fossil history or in the natural world. Right.
There's no way that you're going to have a caniform evolve into a humanoid. There's no bipedal canids. That doesn't make sense because structurally that's not their design. So, you know, maybe people are misidentifying Bigfoot. You know, that's been one of the possibilities, right? You know, or yeah, well, you know, there are, I don't know if you've heard of them, but I've gotten some reports of Bigfoot, not a snout, but, you know, an extended jaw, prognathism, you know, where they have kind of a long face. Could look dog-like, I suppose, if you in a certain way. Or, you know, maybe these dogmen are more like supernatural. And I don't know if you get this question a lot, Ed, but pretty much everyone now asks me about the interdimensional Bigfoot. That's kind of the other craze that's going on, right? Everyone wants to know, well, what do you think? UFOs, interdimensional, is that why we haven't found them? And, you know, I typically don't like to go there first, but, you know, I do acknowledge that it's a huge, vast, unexplored world, and there's a lot of things we don't know. So, you know, you have to acknowledge that pretty much anything is possible, I suppose.
Sure. I can tell you that, you know, I interviewed, since I interviewed him, I'll go ahead and say his name. I interviewed Dr. Johnson, and he gave me a lot of food for thought, I guess, when, you know, he was talking about zapping and mind speak and all this, you know, and I'll tell you, I'm not calling anybody crazy by any stretch of the imagination, because we just don't know.
Yeah, that's where I'm at, man. We don't know. You know,
exactly. I'll just say my mind finds it hard to fathom that possibility. Not that it isn't true, or not that it isn't so. I just can't seem to grasp an understanding of it, I guess. So so it's an interesting thing to study. It's an interesting thing to talk about. And I've always said, no matter what your opinion is, you have a right to be heard, you know, without ridicule, you know, and that's important, you know. So I'm not going to say anything bad one way or the other. I don't necessarily believe it myself, but who knows?
Yeah, I'm there with you, Ed. That's kind of how I feel too. A truly objective person has to remain open-minded to any possibility, I think that is the true scientific kind of philosophy, you know. Be open to anything, because science, and we've been proven wrong so many times before. And I do have friends, I'm not a physics guy, but I have friends that are really into quantum physics, and, you know, they make a pretty strong case when they can explain it in a way that I understand that there could be other dimensions of you know, matter and time and space, and so therefore there could be things that somehow move between those dimensions. So I mean, it is, I guess, theoretically possible.
It's definitely one of those things that goes right along with the mystery and the allure already. So who knows? It's a lot of fun. I know that. already. Do you want to talk about those books? Kind of tell us a little bit about the three you have, and then you just mentioned the fourth. I know you've touched on a couple of them. Might as well give you a chance to get that out.
No, I appreciate it. Yeah, my first book was called Big Bird, Modern Sightings of Flying Monsters. It's about the Thunderbird phenomenon, which a lot of people don't know about, but there are a lot of sightings of these giant airplane-sized birds and that relate to Native American legends. My second book is called Monsters of Texas. It was co-authored with my good friend Nick Redfern, and as the name implies, it covers all of the cryptid creatures of Texas, Bigfoot, and many others. And then my book that came out in 2013 was called Encounters with Flying Humanoids, Mothman, Man-Birds, Gargoyles, and Other Winged Beasts, and that's published through Llewellyn. And all of my books are available online at Amazon, and you can find the Flying Humanoids books at most Barnes & Noble locations.
Good deal. Good deal. Well, you can go to Amazon. Just type in, I'm sure, author Ken Gerhard, Gerhard, and I'm sure all of them will pop up. And well, Ken, man, I'm gonna sit here and enjoy the rest of my Sasquatch coffee. Still hot, by the way. Have you ever had Sasquatch coffee, by the way, Ken?
No, I have not. Where do I get some?
You can go to SasquatchCoffee.com. And he's got a great website. He's got some great flavors. The one I'm drinking out right now is one that actually might entice you a little bit. It's called 8 Canyon. It's a dark blend, and man, it is really, really good. But you definitely should check it out. Go online, order you some, and try it out. It's actually really good. I don't know if you're a coffee drinker or not, but if you are, you haven't had coffee until you've had Sasquatch coffee.
Awesome.
So check that out. Ken, thanks for coming on the show, man. I've had a great time talking to you. I can't tell you how much fun it was to have an opportunity to discuss so many other cryptid animals that I've always wanted to talk about. But on the show, we have a lot of Bigfoot people, and I'm not complaining. I love them. But it's great to talk about other things as well. So I appreciate you taking the time tonight and then joining me.
Well, thank you for having me on, Ed. It was a great interview, man. Some wonderful questions, and I think we covered a lot of stuff. And man, I had a blast. Hopefully, we can get together again and do it again real soon.
We definitely will, because this only covered a very small portion of your experiences, and you have so much more to offer. And I want to add one more thing real quick, if you don't mind. I interviewed Dr. Meldrum, and I'll tell you what, you talk about a smart guy. That guy is an extremely intelligent guy. Great interview. I loved talking to him. But you have the same vocabulary. How do you remember all these different types of, prehistoric people and levels and stages and years? I was thinking during the interview, he's got to have a cheat sheet. Do you keep a cheat sheet under your hat?
No, not at all, Ed. But, man, I can't say what an honor it is to be mentioned in the same breath as Dr. Jeff. Every time I'm around that guy, which unfortunately hasn't been enough, it's like I feel like my IQ is just being elevated just standing next to him, just by osmosis. But I personally, I'm just an information junkie, and I love books, and I'm pretty much reading and researching all day long, and I'm putting myself through school on a daily basis. So, but I appreciate the compliment. Thank you.
Well, it was funny because when I interviewed him at the very beginning, I told him, I said, I don't know if I would pass your class or not, but I would love to take your class. And then at the end, I said, and he kind of put me in my place, because I said, I know now that I would probably not pass your class. And he said, well, I'd like to think I'm a good teacher too. So I'm like, okay, touche, you got me. and he would be. But hey, Ken, again, thanks for coming on the show, and we look forward to having you on again sometime.
All right. Sounds good, Ed. You take care, brother.
Thank you. And everybody, thanks for clicking into this one. We're going to catch you again soon. We've got some really big things coming up. We got some great announcements to make. Just stay tuned. You don't want to miss this stuff. With that, we are out.